It is an absolute delight to co-create my reality today with Jovanny Varela. Jovanny, you are the creator and curator of the Artidote. You're an artist yourself. You're also a social media influencer and an advocate of mental health. And that's what I really want to talk to you about today, starting with mental health, because I'm super impressed with what you're doing on social media to save lives. Can you tell me about the Artidote?
The Artidote, before it was the Artidote, it was a playground on social media. And we're talking about 2012 and 2013, when there wasn't any art that really spoke to me on social media, and no content that really sort of grabbed my attention besides the useless, it may be useful to some people, but to me it was useless. The food porn, the cat videos, the memes, all the content that I noticed right away would give people a sort of like high, a rush right away, but you would forget about. There was nothing that would engage you individually with your feelings. And so the origins of the Artidote started with that sort of curiosity of what could happen if these tools were used in a way that could bring forth a sense of understanding of self, a sense of connection to others, putting the social in the media, because I also noticed that people were separating from others to be a part of the social media, right? And so that to me was it didn't seem well. It didn't seem like it fit the purpose of the medium to connect people. And so I tried to make it do what it was intended to do, I thought, in the first place. And that's where I fused my passions for art, for psychology, that's the mental health aspect of it, my passion with philosophy, the big questions that make us see the world or look at the world beyond, ourselves, and also a passion for technology and the way that we interact with it. And so that fusion eventually brought forth this page where I shared artwork and messages that would expand maybe your perception and would make you feel something, with the art, which is what makes art really special for me. The fact that it makes me feel something beyond sometimes myself. And so I just simply wanted to share that with people, and had no idea that it would snowball into what it is today. Actually, as we filmed this, the Artidote is about to reach 1 million followers on Instagram, which is another sort of milestone in the social media landscapes. But yeah, that's the very origins of it, just curiosity for the tools at hand.
Yeah, that is absolutely amazing and so inspiring to me. You talked about how people split from themselves in order to belong to the group. And I see that happening from a psychological perspective quite a lot. And that split is really the source of mental illness to a large degree. How do we use social media in the polarized positive expression in order to combat that split?
I think that first and foremost, should we use social media for ourselves is a question that I think that every individual should answer. There is always this mentality that because everybody else is doing something, therefore I feel left out if I don't, which is the tricky part of, I think, any sort of collective or group of people that are beginning to use a new technology or beginning to use a new language or doing something new. When there's a huge amount of people doing something, every single person that is new to that feels left out, and there's this human necessity to connect. I mean, we're social creatures after all. So I think that the question is, how can I use this tool in a mindful way so that it's not separate from my everyday life, but how can I fuse it with my everyday life to maybe expand the experience of my everyday life? These are questions that I myself am answering or trying to answer, for myself. How do I use my personal channels in a way that is not separating myself from the people that already know me, but is also a tool the same way that, for example, we use cameras to sort of zoom in on a particular aspect of the physical world and to blow it up and make us pay attention to a particular thing. I mean, that's the magic of photography. And I feel that there's magic in social media as well, about using it in a way that brings people together, that it connects people and different, lenses and different projections of the world that we each have. And we can use it in a way that instead of separating ourselves from the others, can we create content that is mindful so that it also connects us to the people that we are already connected to in the real world? And how can it not be a tool that separates us not only from others, but also from ourselves? Because sometimes there is that pressure of appearing perfect or appearing like an ideal self. And that's something that requires a lifetime to even get to that point where we feel fully comfortable with who we are. And we've done already some inner work to get to that level. But having the tool of social media is like asking a newborn baby to run immediately. And it takes time. And I think that we simply need better role models that use these tools so that we can say, the way that person is using this tool is a way that actually not only makes sense, but is nurturing to that person and to others. And I don't want to ever say that it must be a tool that has to be used. I think that it's a fair point to also say that there's people that don't need, to be on social media or to use social media. So it's a matter of preference, but also how are we mindful, with the tool, which is just a tool, right? Just like anything else. I always use the example of social media being like a hammer, right? And with a hammer, you can build a house, or with a hammer, you can also smash somebody's head, right? So it's just a tool, and it really depends on how we as individuals use it. And so I personally simply decide to use it to build and not to destroy.
Yes, likewise. And you serve as such a valuable role model in doing so. One of the things that I think is so impressive about what you're doing is that you're actually uniting people from different cultures. I think that is really important in today's age of divide and conquer. Mm-hmm. So how do you think that's really affecting and impacting your demographic, your community?
I think that for me, the channel that has opened up more impact than any other with what I do is the channel that I opened up on Snapchat, or the possibility of people sharing their individual stories. Because the moment that the channel is open, the moment that we project our inner worlds and our vulnerable selves, our real selves, is the moment that other people can also anchor themselves to others. And sometimes it's such a beautiful thing to see and to experience when people that would exist otherwise in the quote-unquote real world, in a political divide, or countries that, for example, historically are at war with each other. For me, it's such a treat to see people that are connecting with vulnerable stories that come from those countries of division in the real world. So for me, this glimpse is a glimpse of hope, a glimpse of possibility as well. If we sort of take away the masks and the divisions that, ironically, we ourselves have created in the real world. And so I think that's the challenge with the tools, that we have, especially with social media.
No, I agree. You remind me of, I was looking for this project for pictures of myself when I was drinking quite a lot, alcoholically. I couldn't find one that I'd actually taken. There are a few taken by the police because I was involved in a horrific attack. And I finally did get permission to get that back. But from the looks of it, in the 2 years that were really acute alcoholism, there was no photograph of me whatsoever. And of course not posted on anything, but
taken
not
by
even,
you.
none, by nobody.
Wow.
No photograph or video exists that I could find. I mean, I've really dug to try to find it.
Mm-hmm.
By the looks of it, everything was fine. And I was literally dying, both inside and out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this is what so many of us do.
Yeah.
And how damaging that is, you know? And I was so heartened to find a whole community and a whole platform where you're really advocating on that social media level, on that public level. Hey, expose your real self. You know, it's an invitation.
Yeah. But also I'm noticing that I also don't want to pressure people into exposing parts of themselves that may not be ready, you know, to be exposed. For me, traveling the world and meeting people from different cultures also has opened my eyes to the different dynamics of different cultures. And there's cultures, for example, where that private self never sort of gets encouraged, even within family members. There's cultures, for instance, that don't talk about their problems, don't talk about their frictions until a family gathering like Thanksgiving or Christmas. And all of a sudden, all of those frictions come out at the dinner table because they didn't address them beforehand. You know, and this is a personal anecdote of living in Germany and having German friends that have told me that this is the case with their family. And so I also understand that there's cultures that, since they don't encourage that vulnerability, people don't develop the language to talk about their insights, right? And so this is a process. And so I don't want to also go on social media and say, be vulnerable, open up, because I know that as much as social media is a tool, language is also a tool. And sometimes there's people that don't have that tool of language to express how they're feeling. So maybe let's start there. Maybe let's start encouraging people to simply open up, and it doesn't have to be on social media. You can do it on a private journal. You can open up to yourself about how you feel. I think that every single person that is now well-versed in the art or skill of sharing their feelings started very uncomfortably talking to themselves or sharing those feelings with themselves. I mean, the reason why I'm so comfortable doing it now is because, I mean, it's part of my training as an artist, you know, to share your feelings and to be able to verbalize them. But I don't expect every single person to be at that point. And so I'm, instead of wanting people to use social media to expose themselves, I simply want them to expose themselves in whatever medium, you know, they have at hand. And I think that that's the beginning of that hope for later being able to express it fully.
Very wise words, because actually there is a lot of responsibility involved in running a platform and curating a platform such as Artidote. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me a little bit about the responsibility that you feel?
Yeah, I constantly receive messages, especially from teenagers, that say thank you, messages of gratitude that say thank you for putting my feelings into words. Sometimes I don't know what I'm feeling, and I go on your page and I see the posts and I see the messages, and then I have words for my feelings, you know, which speaks to the thing that I just mentioned, not having the words to express how you're really feeling. And so the responsibility is, what messages, what words do I want to put out there for people to relate to? Because that's sort of also the type of work that I do, relatability. And relatability already exists on social media, but it's usually with memes, with jokes, with things that are relatable, but it's kind of like stand-up comedy. You know, like you have like a Seinfeld joke that says, you know, when you're in an airplane, you know, you're a passenger, and then all of a sudden people are like, oh yeah, I've been there in that situation, but can we talk about things that are also relatable, but we don't usually talk about, you know, them, like the suffering that comes from losing a loved one, and the hole that you find yourself in, you know, sometimes not even with a loss, but sometimes personally when you're just not fulfilled, you know, with your life. There are so many people that you really don't get to meet because they don't share those things. So who are we meeting, right? And so the responsibility for me is to put out content out there that people can anchor themselves to, but it's also helpful for their own inner growth. And the only reason why I mentioned that is because at this stage of the game, I know very well how to make viral content with my community, but I don't want to use that power to share viral content that is not nurturing to the community, right? And it's very easy to make a post about heartbreak, and we can all relate to that, but how can I make a post about suffering from heartbreak and not leave people on the ground suffering? Like, how can I show them the little crack with light so that they can see beyond their suffering? So that's the responsibility, not to just relate to people's suffering, but to also tell them, hey, it's okay, to not be okay, but let's for a moment expand into the bigger picture and let's see beyond, this moment, because life goes on beyond not only this moment, but beyond our own individual lives.
Absolutely. I call it the Google Map zoom out.
Yeah.
I do that with clients a lot. Let's just for a minute go all the way out to the satellite view.
Yeah.
And it can be really effective, actually.
Or for a moment for example, like I didn't come up with it, but there's this, I forget who said it, this idea of us walking around with our own individual lenses, right? And from time to time, there's somebody that maybe has a way of viewing the world where you take a little bit of peek at their way of viewing the world and they're like, whoa, I had no idea that this is a way of viewing the world. But this action of being away from like your own individual lenses that you've already conditioned yourself to believe, it takes a lot of energy or thought to even find the way of disassociating yourself from that particular view of the world, especially if that view is not something that is making you want to be a part of the world sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Absolutely. You talked about the magic of social media, and we've also talked about the arts. And I'm wondering if, we can liken the art of social media as well to the art of feeling, in a sense, and sort of using that metaphor, that analogy, kind of going with it in terms of, life as an art. And that's one of the visuals that I'm trying to sort of weave in and out of this documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think the arts can be used as expression? Let me rephrase that. How do you think the arts can be used as a tool of expression for your emotions?
For me, it's almost sometimes comical how the technology that we are surrounded by, and the very specific visual technology, like the apps that we use, are asking every single person that uses this technology to be an artist. Because the tools of, for example, Facebook and Instagram is there's a picture and there's text. And so you're communicating with a picture and with a text. Communicating with pictures and with text, it's something that you go to school for, or you used to want to go to school for, to become a photographer, to become an artist, to become a poet, to become, a writer. This is an art form, expressing yourself through visuals and through text. But all of a sudden, those tools become available to everybody. Now everybody has the tools of artists. So we're asking everybody to be artists, and not everybody, has the experience of knowing how to craft language or how to craft an image to really express what they're trying to say. And so a lot of times we fall into the hole of repeating something that somebody else has said, or repeating an angle that somebody else has captured, simply because we want to be a part of this ecosystem without actually understanding our own voice and our own way of expression. And so back to your question, how can art be used as a tool of expression? I struggled a lot when I went to university for art, understanding what art really was. When I went to university, I learned so many theories about art, so many concepts that disappointed me about art, because I thought that we were still living 100 years ago when I went to art school in the 1920s with Picasso making art that really spoke about, your feelings and sort of challenging, the status quo, both of the art scene and of your own personal, growth. And for me, art has always been about communication, about transferring an idea, an emotion to somebody else. And so now in this day and age, there's a lot of art that is full of concepts, full of theories, full of ideas that only artists understand. Like, that's how my view of the art world became in university, and I wanted none of it. And so I wanted to create art that communicated, real feelings, individual feelings, because I felt that that's where the power of art was, in that connection. And so for me, art has expanded beyond thinking that art is a painting that you see on the wall or a photo that you take. For me, art can be a conversation. Art can be a way of living your life. Art, if I were to like boil it down, would be the purest form of expression that you can come up with in whatever thing that you're doing, as long as you're able to express it to another being and there's understanding happening between. When that happens, to me, there's art. And that doesn't require, a frame or language even sometimes. Sometimes it's just the way that you move across the world.
When you've talked about it, it is such a powerful language. And not only of emotion, but perhaps of spirit too. Do you mind going into matters of the soul?
I don't. I'm swimming right now in matters of the soul, actually, as we speak.
Well, we spoke a bit about your personal journey and how difficult it was being in Berlin at first.
Yeah.
Do you want to start there and we can carry on?
Yeah. There's been few moments in my life, the Berlin shift was one of them, where logically the decision that was before me didn't make sense. It was an irrational decision. And the decision specifically was to be an art school graduate in the US and being a citizen of the US and wanting to move across the world to Europe. And the reason why that was illogical, or at least it was sold to me as illogical, was because, for example, my brothers would say, why are you leaving the best country in the world to go elsewhere? Like, what are you seeking elsewhere? We have everything that you need here. At that point in my life, there was something that I did not understand. I didn't know how to express it, but there was something that was calling me. I felt called towards something. And very few times in my life I have felt this strongly, where I don't have the words, I don't have the tools to be able to explain to the people around me, hey, I have to do this. And I've been able to trust myself more and more with that feeling, simply because of that Berlin experience. And the experience was coming here, walking through these streets for about 2 weeks, trying to find a job and trying to find housing. I came to Berlin the naive way. I used to say the stupid way, but now I say the naive way. The stupid way would have been not securing a job and housing. The naive way is taking the jump because without even securing anything, because had I known how difficult it was going to be to actually secure a job, housing, and to make it or to find my way in this new world, I would have scared myself into not doing it. So had I known exactly what I was putting myself up against, I would have stayed somewhere in my comfort zone, back in the US. And I don't regret it one single bit. And so it's interesting that right now we're talking about these matters of the soul, these, I don't know what to call it still. I still lack the language to fully explain what that pull is. But it's interesting that we talk about it now, because I'm once again at that point. And I don't know if I already mentioned it to you, but I'm moving to India next year.
You mentioned on the phone. I didn't know if it was public information yet.
Yeah, well, now it is.
Brilliant.
But yeah.
Congratulations. The next step in your soul journey.
Thank you. It's, as you probably know, scary and exciting at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to always go through that fear to get to the next level of consciousness,
yeah.
I believe.
I was having a thought today as I was doing meditation and my yoga practice, which is something that I picked up just a year ago. I had no idea of the benefits. And there's this pose where your feet are up in the air and you're balancing yourself just with your head and with your two arms, right? And there is a moment where you feel the tension in your arms because you're about to fall and you're putting too much energy in holding yourself up. And then getting to the point of balance requires trust in yourself that you're not going to fall, and also letting go of that fear of falling. And in that balance, I don't know, I understood something about life in general, that I love living at that point where I'm not fully in control, but I know that I'm going to be held. I know that I'm aligned, and I know that I'm not going to fall. But it's that sort of suspension from grabbing onto something and just letting go for a bit and finding that balance and alignment. And that's something that I'm beginning to apply also in my life. Do not be so afraid about what tomorrow will bring, but to just make the most of like what this experience is here for and teaching me.
Oh, so beautifully said. And we're on now to the art of yoga,
Yeah.
which is another point that I really try to make in the film, is that emotion is stored in the body. Something that you've said previously that I found really interesting was that you likened your social media network to a mass meditation. Can you explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah, there's different ways, I think, of approaching it. There's different ways of talking about it. I could talk about it in terms of shamanism and throwing out feelings that I'm very much feeling at that moment. And if I know anything about myself and the world, is that if I feel something very deeply, chances are that somebody else out there is also experiencing something like this. And so I put things out there, both to calm not only sometimes myself, but to also bring calm to others. And it's amazing how the posts or the content that I feel the most deeply at that specific moment has the most resonance, in people. And I'm actually telling you this right at the moment where the previous post on the Artidote has been the most liked and shared post in Instagram's history of the page. And I really felt it when I shared it. And so I can explain it also the same way that, for example, people explain things through the tarot card reading, where sometimes these posts appear randomly on people's timelines and they go, this is exactly what I needed at this particular time, right? I'm so glad that I opened up my Instagram or I followed your page because this is exactly what I'm going through right now. I had no idea that somebody else was going through the same. I don't feel so alone anymore. And so for me, it's always been an experiment of connection, of trying to see how far a post can go and how, not only how far, but also how deep a post can go. And sometimes that impact, I can just imagine it. And other times I really get the feedback that it's made its impact somewhere in the world. Like the little wave that I sent, I'm getting waves back of that resonance, and yeah, it's nothing short of magical, and I love experiencing life in that space where the things that you let out, whether it's out on social media, in everyday life, the conversations that you have, the energy that you release onto the world, it's really beautiful when that energy comes back to you. And so for me, using social media, I used to cringe at what I'm about to say. I no longer do. But for me, social media is an act of love, or my use of social media is always an act of love. And every single time before I open up my apps and begin to do the work that I do on social media, I meditate and I make sure that I'm aligned with my purpose, with my mission, with my intentions. And I do nothing but release that love onto the world. And when it comes back to me, not in likes, not in shares, not in comments, but in actual real interactions with people that tell me how much that impact has had in their lives, that's when I know that, it really doesn't take a lot to change the world. Sometimes it could be a little Facebook post that has that resonance.
Right, that ripple effect has enormous impact.
Yeah, no, it's
and
really
I think
fun.
A lot of people feel like, oh, little old me, what can I really do to save the world? And so you're saying, well, maybe actually...
I'm saying that you can do very little, to save the world. You can, in any single action that you take, you can infuse that little action with so much love. And you'd be surprised at how much that changes not only the way that you experience the world, but also that ripple effect, comes back to you in one way or another. And I don't want to use language that other people have already sort of associated with other things like karma, for instance, but it's something very similar, to that.
What you put out, you get back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am touched by your level of reflection. Could you talk me through the process of intentional posting that you do? Just as a bit of a blueprint, if you will, that maybe others can follow, or I can, I'll think, because I see that as a conscious way of really deliberately infusing love into what you do, as opposed to spilling out, right? There's a big difference between expressing your emotion and expressing your emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So how do you do it?
In the past, it would take me a long time to come up with content, to research it, and to fuse it together and share it. It would take me sometimes hours on one particular post. Because for me, the magic of the posts that I share is fusing two pieces of content that are unrelated, but somehow dance with each other and create something new. Now my process is different. Now I collect the content that resonates with me, and I have an entire collection of both text, images, thoughts, and I wait until something resonates and I make that click, but not only wait in the sense of waiting for inspiration to strike. Sometimes I go in and I see the content that I have, and I only share the thing that really resonates with me at that point. And so for me, when I talk about intentional posting and intentional sharing, is first answering the question, what am I feeling right now? Disregarding the trends that are happening, disregarding the hashtag of the day, what am I truly feeling right now? And usually when I answer that for myself, I share content, whether it's personal, whether it's something maybe that somebody else had said, and I simply want to share it with the world. I start there. What am I really feeling? And then from the content that I have, to share something around those lines.
Do you believe you're a conduit of the collective emotional temperature, if you will?
Let me tell you a story to answer that question. About a year ago, I had a mental breakdown. It was the middle of June, and I was healing from a heartbreak, and I was also missing, during that particular time, very deeply, the passing of my mother. And it seemed a little bit too much. Sometimes I'm perfectly fine and I can handle, all the stresses of everyday life, but sometimes I also get very sensitive, with the things that are happening. And so I remember opening up Instagram that day and creating a video, which is still actually on the timeline on the Instagram channel. And the video was a very personal message to the community, saying something around the lines of, hey, if you're feeling something heavy right now, wherever you are, just know that you're not alone. I'm also feeling it. And right now, at this point in my life, I know what I need to do during this time of vulnerability. I need to take extra good care of myself. I need to be very mindful of the conversations that I have with people, of the people that I surround myself with, of the spaces that I put my body in. And so right now I need extra care. And because of that, I need to be away from the responsibility of social media, because I need to first, take care of myself. And once I'm taken care of and I'm at 100%, then I can be the conduit, that this community needs. And I can give the energy that this community needs. And I posted it. The next day, news came across the world of Anthony Bourdain's suicide. And a couple days later, Kate Spade, the designer. And so just because it happened during that particular week, there was a thought that I never had before, which is what you hinted towards, whether there was something that I was able to sense in the collective, and I sensed it, and I was like, whoa, it's time to really take care of ourselves. And so I shared the message of, everybody, let's take care of ourselves during this time. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, let's do that. And then with these sort of news that broke the news cycle and spread viral through the internet, I started questioning whether there was something there that I had, without wanting to go too far away into ideas of mysticism, ideas that are much more esoteric, that I've been sort of not sure that I want to go that far into, because I still want to keep a grasp on science and the things that we do know, but I also know that there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. And so I want to be somewhere in the middle. But But when I do believe that I'm sort of like a conduit, I notice that my work tends to become much more easier and much more fun as well. And I share things that people need. And I love giving people sometimes what they want, but adding in there something that they didn't know, they needed. And that goes for my life, both in social media and outside. And now I love doing that, giving people something that they didn't know they needed in everyday interactions as well.
That's brilliant. How do you know you're in alignment?
It's really strange. Maybe 5 years ago, I wouldn't have known how to respond to that question. But I think that my self-healing journey, if you want to call it that, started about 5 years ago with the work actually that I'm doing online now. And little by little, I've been able to understand myself more. I know, for instance, that I have a history of social anxiety, even though it was never diagnosed, because in my family, we wouldn't talk about mental health. We wouldn't talk about seeking professional help because it's a big stigma and taboo in most societies, actually. Now I know. And so I never sought that professional help, but I knew that I needed some sort of guidance and understanding of what was happening inside of me. So I started doing my own research about how the brain works, how the body works, the nervous system, research on trauma. And little by little over the years, I've been able to find tools that have helped me ground myself. And one of the most recent tools has been yoga and meditation, which I disregarded for a really long time because there was never a role model that I would believe 100% that would explain to me the power of yoga or meditation. It always seemed something too esoteric for me. And then I had an experience in India where one of my soul friends said, "Hey, let's do a yoga session," just out of the blue. And I did it, and it was very personal, and it was very beautiful, and it lasted an hour. And it was the first time that I discovered how powerful taking your body through an experience can be, because especially an experience that your body has never been in. What I didn't realize was that my body was going through an experience that it's never been in, but I hadn't accounted for my mind also going to a place where it's never been to. And so I remember at the end of that session, just my mind being completely silent and blank, no anxiety running through my body. And then opening up my phone, seeing all the messages and all the decisions that I had to make, and not having second doubts about what needed to be done. And I replied right away to all those decisions that I had to make, because my mind was at that space of clarity and alignment, and something that I hadn't experienced before. And so that happened a year ago. With the practice, a daily practice of yoga meditation, something happened this past June, exactly a year to the date of my mental breakdown. I broke down again during a yoga meditation session, but for different reasons than in the past. I was able to go into a very deep space of meditation where I realized that all the tools that I have learned along the way, and especially this daily meditative practice, which is really a practice of self-awareness of who you are, who you're becoming, who you want to be, what you don't like about yourself that you can change. It's like self-assessment. For the very first time in my life, or not in my life, but in the last 20 years, 2 decades of my life of going out in public and always experiencing social anxiety, there was never a moment where I was out in public and I wasn't afraid for my life, or I wasn't super self-conscious of who I was and what would people think about me. For the very first time in 20 years, after, say, half a year of doing this daily self-assessment and meditation and calming down my nervous system and understanding my nervous system, I broke down crying and laughing at the same time. I didn't know how to explain, that emotion or express it. So just in the solitude of my room, tears started flowing, but really like hardcore, and also laughter, because I realized that for the very first time in my life, the past few months have been anxiety-free. And it felt like a superpower. It felt like I was missing out on something that I thought that everybody else was already experiencing. And I was thinking to myself, guys, this is what I've been missing out on. Oh my God, the world is now a playground. Now I can go outside and play without feeling like my life is in danger, without being afraid of people. And so for me, that getting to that space that daily meditation brings me, makes me know that any decision that I will take during that day is the right decision for that moment. But I have to feel that alignment and that clarity. And usually, I give the 24 hours that we all have in every single day, I take away 1 hour. So I say that I only live 23/7, because that 1 hour is for myself only, where all my social media, all of my technology, it's outside of me. I don't pay attention to it, and I'm not available for anybody. And I mean nobody. And all of my roles, whether it's brother, son, community leader, social media personality, anything that I'm associated with in the world doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is my awareness that I'm a living organism in this moment in time. What do I do with that superpower of being an organism that is self-aware? What can I do to make it better also for other organisms, both aware and not aware? And that 1 hour to me is one of the most important hours, in my day, because it fuels me.
I had a similar yoga experience where it's just been a process of unfolding. I've been doing yoga and meditation for years religiously now. It's my own way of turning emotional commotion into emotional devotion, right? And that is like that non-negotiable space for not only myself, but like you said, that interconnectivity that I honor by stopping the monkey mind and just adhering to that presence, that all-encompassing awareness,
Yeah, and the reality of this transient awareness as well. Because I've been thinking about death a lot recently. Not in a macabre or scary way, but in a factual way. And thinking about, there will be an end for all of us. And so I'm really curious how this documentary, for instance, is going to age. Because I also understand that right now I'm a very specific point in my life where there's about to be more of a switch in who I am and how I think, especially with my move now to India, because I'm just becoming aware of these things that we're talking about. For most of my life, I wasn't this aware of my own inner world and my nervous system and my connection to the spiritual world. My connection to the spiritual world was what my parents taught me through Christianity and through the language of Christianity, which at a certain point I didn't resonate with so much. And I began to feel that there wasn't a language to explain the things that I was feeling inside. And then I realized that a lot of religions in the world would monopolize that spirituality, that sense of connectivity to everything, not only living things, but non-living things, to the whole organism of the planet. And up until very recently, I've started sort of developing that inner language for myself. So I'm also coming into this table with a little bit of that imposter syndrome, or imposter-like fear of like, I can only share the things that I know personally, but I also know that there's a lot of stuff that I don't know, right? And so, let's talk about that. But I just wanted to also mention the fact that I'm a baby when it comes to the world. I have more questions than answers.
Man, that's why I'm doing this, because I'm going around asking all the questions. But I think we all have answers for each other, or I find that everybody has a piece to the puzzle. Even people that might not look like it on the outside. Very often they're the ones I get most wisdom from.
I'm noticing that social media has also created like a labyrinth, and the labyrinth looks like mirrors. So it's very distracting seeing versions of ourselves play out in this labyrinth of mirrors. And what I do with my page is I offer the possibility of not having a mirror and not having a labyrinth during one particular corner, to be able to escape it for a little bit and to remind people that this is not a real world. It's very real in the way that we perceive it with our conscious, the same way that we perceive dreams. But it's not real if it's only a mirror projection of everybody trying to, how can I say this? everybody trying to project an image that doesn't feel true to themselves. And from experience, I'm almost afraid of going on the record for saying this, but from experience, I've seen people develop mental illnesses when they're not allowed to be themselves and to be who they are. And this can come from societal pressures, from parental pressures. And as soon as that pocket or a channel opens up where people are allowed to be themselves and to blossom into the beings that they are, that's the moment where healing begins to happen from experience. And so that's, I think, what I want to bring with my page, with my community, with my virtual footprint in the social media landscape.
That's what I find so honorable about what you're doing, is that you are giving people permission to be their authentic selves. Do you think that in this age of escape, we're living sort of in a global emotional emergency?
The global emotional emergency is only happening because we don't have the tools to put the fire out. If we knew where the fire extinguisher was, there wouldn't be a global emotional emergency. But we keep hiding from it. We keep escaping, having to learn how to use a fire extinguisher. And the fire extinguisher in this case is our feelings, our emotions, the way that we navigate the world. I mean, that's our inner compass. That's how we know what hurts, what doesn't, what fulfills, what doesn't. And so the more that we try, the more that we continue to put ourselves in a position where we don't allow ourselves to feel, the more that we're going to continue to have this crisis of emotions.
I wanted to ask you about addiction as well, because it is so personal to me. I'm trying to also be, in my own way, a role model like you are, and expose my own vulnerability, my own dark moments, to maybe give permission to someone else to share that and find the healing that I found when I could share it with somebody who understood.
Yeah.
What are your views on addiction? Do you think it's also an epidemic?
I think so. I think it has to do with the escapism that we're also talking about, that there is something that we are either unwilling or don't have the tools to confront. And so addiction plays a role in keeping us away from confronting the thing that we need to confront. And addiction can come in cigarettes, in alcohol, in social media as well. And so I also sometimes find myself not necessarily being addicted on a day-to-day basis, but I could spend one day surfing the web for hours before I realize, whoa, this is not healthy. Even for me, this is messing right now with my emotional stability. And so the answer is yes, but it's because we're, again, avoiding learning how to use a fire extinguisher.
Yeah, absolutely. What is this idea of breathe coming?
I was actually going to wear the shirt for the interview.
I just noticed you took a deep breath and I thought, right, let's go into it.
Yeah. Breathe is becoming more than just a word. I mean, for me now, and for the people that are touched by the concept of it, it started very simply on Instagram and very literally as well. I would just create a video for 15 seconds, not moving the camera. And originally it was titled or captioned, breathe in, breathe out, to give people not the permission, but the reminder that you're alive, and that eventually evolved into just breathe. And beyond the 15-second videos that now I share on a weekly basis on Instagram, now people are getting tattoos of them. And what I've noticed that I've never expected is people are fusing the breathe words with the semicolon tattoo that was popularized against suicide or for survivors, to let people know that they could have ended, the sentence with a period, but the semicolon speaks of continuing. And breathe has now become, or is becoming, something beyond, a word. Sometimes it feels like a prayer. Sometimes it feels like the thing that we must never forget. Because for me, there's so much magic in being aware that we're breathing and that we're here. And so just the loop that happens when there's a word that my brain recognizes as an action and reminds me to breathe is an act of self-awareness. And so eventually it will be much more than what it has been now, simply because I know, of the impact that one single word is having on so many people. And to the point where people wear the shirt, especially in cities that are populated by a lot of people that follow, the community of the Artidote online, they see other people in their streets wearing the shirt, and they're like, oh, that's a person from, this community that I'm also a part of and that I love. And so all of a sudden it's an invitation as well to speak to someone, to connect, with someone in real life. When I wear the shirt, it's interesting walking around the streets and seeing the people that I pass, on the streets go, because it serves as a reminder for them as well. So it's both a note to self, and a reminder to others, that you encounter. So it's just been a beautiful experiment.
Beautiful. It's a physical embodiment of spirit to me. It's that connection to your perhaps highest self.
Yeah.
Like you, and in this film especially, I am trying to toe that line or be the bridge between sort of the mystical, if you will, and the science.
Yeah.
And I think in that way, the science helps us believe. I'm about to interview Dr. Bruce Lipton, actually, who talks about the biology of belief. He's written a book called such. Do you think that our beliefs and our feelings actually create our reality to an extent?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think that is both the gift and the curse of being a human being, the ability to create our own reality. And we've been doing it for millennia. I think that if human beings are good at something, is at creating stories that exist beyond themselves. And sometimes we attach ourselves too much to a particular story or idea or belief, that if somebody else comes in with their own story, idea, and belief, and it doesn't resonate with what we've attached ourselves too much to, there's conflict and there's friction and there's war and there's death and destruction. And we've seen it play out so much in humanity. But there's also beliefs that instead of separating, connect and open up for people to come in and to not have that friction. And I think I'm trying to create that for people. Beliefs that are open-ended, beliefs that don't require a division or a boundary to be a part of the belief, because I exist in the world like that. And I think that for me, it's now a gift. Before it was a curse. Having been born in Mexico, grown up in the US, now living in Germany, I used to be a human being that didn't have a concept of home. I didn't know, what that was, because everybody else was telling me, well, you were born in Mexico, you're Mexican. Oh, but you grew up most of your life in the US. Your identity is more US based than Mexican. Oh, but now I'm living in Germany and I'm very punctual and I'm very efficient, or I try to be. So what am I? And so for me, it's been a journey also of expansion. And the more that I expand myself and my, boundaries, the more that I'm simply a human being. And it sounds cliche to say I know, and I don't mean to disregard cultures and experiences and personal beliefs that have connected other people and have allowed people to survive in their own circumstances, because that's the power also of belief and community. But at least from my own human experience, it would be a disservice to my experience and to my humanity to attach myself to a particular specific, community in the world. And I know that I look 100% Mexican to the people that know what a Mexican looks like. But internally, I'm team human. And the more that I go to different parts of the world, the more that I feel I'm going to go check out my brothers and sisters from the other side of the planet that look a little bit different than me, but nonetheless are also in this floating rock around a ball of fire. And the more that I live the world that way, the more that it becomes not only a playground, but also there's a responsibility with taking care of it. And I think that that's where I come in, with my views on the world and my own stories that I've created and my own beliefs, that the actions that I put on the world are to take care, to nurture, and And it didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, I had the privilege as well of being raised by a very nurturing mother, a mother that would just nurture 6, children, and also have time and energy to nurture hundreds of plants that she kept in her garden. And for me, growing up, seeing that, act of love, both with the family and outside of the family, just having so much love to give, made me want to be like that, and to find that never-ending source of love to just continuously give. And the more that I live and the more that I practice it, the more that love comes back to me. And something that I realized very, very recently that also made me just stop whatever I was doing and start just crying uncontrollably out of happiness and gratitude was the fact that I had no idea that you can put out so much love in the world or in an individual to protect that world or individual, the way that my mother filled me up with so much love. Because the act of filling me up with so much love gave me enough love to give to others, to the point where that love that I was given kept coming back to me and kept protecting me and kept nurturing me, no matter where I go in the world. Like, I have friends now to see across the planet. And I found it very clever in my mother to do that, to continue to take care of me, even if she's no longer here. So I still found a way of keeping that love, alive, that she put in me. And it was a profound lesson in parenting, I feel. And that's the way that I want to exist in the world, just by giving people love, and hopefully that love continues to expand beyond, this lifetime.
Gosh, as a mother, you've just given me the goosies. And also a fellow as well.
No.
I am so touched by what you said about footprint and what footprint you're leaving behind. And you've mentioned a few times taking responsibility for your emotional output. Talking about, again, what you put out, you get back. Could we, in a kind of a power quote, nutshell version here, address, this idea of our emotions actually having a footprint, just like we're all worried about our carbon footprint. Shouldn't we worry about our emotional footprint too?
I notice that whenever I'm comfortable in my body and whenever I feel flow, and I define flow by the difference between the challenge and the skill that you have. When the challenge before you is too much, you don't have the skill level to approach it, you sort of like are weighed down by it and are anxious and feel useless or worthless. When the challenge is too small, you feel bored and you get distracted. But when the challenge and the skill just match, that's when you feel like you're at the right place at the right time. And so I try to put myself at the right place and the right times in my life to experience that flow. And when I'm at that place, also emotionally, I'm perfectly comfortable with what I'm about to say, what I'm about to do. And I notice that when I am in that state, everything not only flows, but also the people around me notice and the people around me feel what I'm feeling. And I'm able to sometimes even communicate without words, just with my body language or with the energy, for lack of better words, that I exude. And I've been more conscious and aware, first and foremost, of that energy, that inner energy that we all carry, because people read it. I mean, I don't think the science is out yet of how we have inner Wi-Fi. Or I've heard this quote recently, or this phrase, the third iPhone, that we read, people, and we can communicate. And so the more that we nurture ourselves and the more that we exist truly, presently, and to the full degree of who we are, then the easier it is, I think, for everybody in the world and everybody that we come across to know how to vibe with that energy. But honesty is always, the best policy, especially to yourself.
It's almost like a currency.
Yeah. I'm actually discovering a new way of traveling the world without money, which is with love. With the things that you create that were made out of love, all of a sudden open up new possibilities that money couldn't buy. And sometimes those possibilities look like a friend that you know you're going to have for the rest of your life. I think that if money could buy friendship, that would be a very different world. But my point is that it doesn't. And a lot of times it's disappointing to realize that we can't buy it all, or at least the necessary things in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can you define sentience?
To be completely honest with you, I can't at this moment. The way that I would even attempt at defining it is that energy that has been there since the beginning, that has created explosions, big bangs, it has expanded, it has created eventually matter, eventually bacteria, eventually little creatures that were able to swim around and reproduce and create others and more and more and more, and eventually left the water and went into land and were able to breathe. And then eventually, somehow, some way, they were able to develop and evolve into having the necessary tools to be aware of the fact that they're alive. And in the past, I used to think that we were responsible, evolutionarily speaking, for developing the brains that would be responsible for self-awareness. But recently, I've been trying to understand the idea that that awareness was already there, and that matter evolved to such a degree where sometimes we reach a heightened level of awareness where we can see the bigger picture as much as our human biology can, take us, and we realize that we're alive before having to come down again and be food for worms. And that's, to me, sentience. That middle ground, the middle ground between a breath, that's sentience. The middle ground between what we call life and death, because that's both the gift and the curse. To have to become not only humans, but little gods in a way, with our creativity, with the tools, the world that we created around us. That's nothing short of a miracle. And at the same time, we have to accept the fact that we're all going to be food for the worms. So both gods and food for worms at the same time. That awareness to me is a side effect of sentience, I feel.
There's a power point in that paradox, to hold both of those opposing forces as truths at the same time. Mm-hmm. I think maybe that's where mental health, spiritual wellness, maybe Zen sits. Perhaps.
I'm trying to discover more and more what mental health actually is, and when we really talk about mental health. And sometimes I get to the point where I don't need to use mental anymore in front of health, but I understand that there's people in the world and communities that haven't gone through the process of actually first acknowledging the fact that there is health in our minds that we have to nurture, that we have to care for, that we're not only a body, right? That we're also a mind, that we're also a spirit, that we're also a soul, a heart. So hopefully we get to the point where we don't even have to say mental, and we just say that we're talking about health. And it's just commonsensical to talk about health holistically and not just, mental.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Do you think we are in the middle of a mental health crisis?
I gulp when I say this because I know, or I feel that the answer is yes, but I don't want to sound like an emergency. I don't want it to sound like an alarm in saying that we are. I want to sound like the awareness necessary to shift our behavior collectively. Every single time when there is a collective problem, you could say, I try to understand it from an individual organism's perspective. So for me, thinking about a mental health crisis, I would imagine, well, if there was a mental health crisis within me as a single organism, what do I need to do to shift that? And I've already done certain tools or explored certain tools that have opened, to shift my behavior and to make me do things differently and experience the world differently. Of course, when we talk about a collective and a planetary approach to this, that takes much more energy and much more people and languages and ideas coming together. And I think that one of the reasons why it's a global mental health crisis is because the technologies that we have today have allowed us to understand how we're all living in this one world. 100 years ago or 200 years ago, or for most of humanity, we were little pockets of consciousness, little pockets of awareness, living different versions of the same experience, of the same human experience. And we had no idea of what everybody else was living like. Now, with the evolution of technology, now that we have, and this is the phrase of biologist E.O. Wilson, which resonates with me every single time that I say it. Now, when we live in a point in humanity where we have Paleolithic emotions, because we haven't evolved so much since the cave days, we have medieval institutions, because our institutions still revolve around the education system of the 1800s or the religious systems that we've had for millennia. And yet, at the same time, we have this godlike technology in our pockets. That's the problem of humanity. What do you do with those Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and now this godlike technology that allows you to see what's happening on the other side of the world in real time? What do we do with so much coming in at once? And that's the question that I try to answer on a daily basis, I think. And I think that if everybody else attempted to answer it as well, then maybe the global collective would be able to create a shift altogether, especially because I know that not all of us have these tools, but the ones that do, it's a responsibility. I mean, power for me is always the responsibility of giving it away. The point of having power is to empower others. And that's what I try to do with my tools.
Jovanny Varela, paving the way, showing us how to use social media and these godlike technologies, as you say, in a socially and emotionally responsible way, which is so incredibly valuable. In my opinion, you're doing God's work. And it's an absolute privilege and honor to meet you and to work with you, to include you in this film. My final question to you is, if we are deconstructing in terms of a spiritual awakening, what is it that we are deconstructing?
I think that, or I feel, whenever I deconstruct myself and my own dogmas and ideas, what I'm really deconstructing is all the layers of external perception that either the world has put upon me or that I've put upon myself. And when I deconstruct myself, I'm deconstructing, sounds strange to say, but I'm deconstructing millennia of perceptions, of masks, of layers upon myself, upon my body, the color of my skin, everything that is visual. And I can't believe I'm going to quote my favorite book, which is a children's book, The Little Prince. But the fox and the little prince tells the little prince that what's essential is always invisible to the eye. And so when we deconstruct sentience, when we deconstruct the it that we're talking about, I think that we are peeling the layers of everything that is visual, of everything that has been constructed by our own minds and there is this other way, or not another way, but there is this extra sense that sometimes we disregard, and we give the power to our visual sense to explain things. But if we just close our eyes from time to time and just breathe, there is a feeling and a connection, at least from personal experience, that disregards millennia of layers on the human creature, and is just a creature, just like the millions of creatures on the planet, or species on the planet, and the planet doesn't revolve around us. We're a part of the whole planet. And so for me, that's the power of deconstructing sentience, the awareness that we're only sentience that's self-aware, but there's sentience that exists, that is not self-aware, that requires also nurturing and growth. So what's our responsibility with being self-aware, sentient beings? There is a responsibility, I feel. Or at least I want to carry that responsibility, because I have the privilege of choosing that problem. I want to have that problem. And I think that's a powerful way and a powerful place of being when you take on that responsibility. And I think that's our responsibility as human beings, as self-aware, sentient beings.
I totally concur. It's a true honor to hear you explain it like that. And wouldn't it be a wonderful world if we all approached that in that emotionally and sentiently responsible way?
I keep dreaming.
Me too. And that's the message I'm trying to promote here. And you've absolutely hit the nail on the head for us today in so many ways. And I think mentorship is really important. You know, we talked about you being a role model through your authenticity, but you lead by the sensitivity in which you do things.
Mm-hmm.
And the deep reflection that I see and feel in you. And I felt that the second I connected with you on the phone. You took it in and you didn't react to me, you responded.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference in that. And you serve as an incredible role model in that way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jovanny, so very much. Is there anything else you would like to add to the conversation?
Yeah. Something that I've been thinking about as recent as today, as recent as this morning. I've been thinking about death in a different way. Not in the macabre or cliche way of we're all gonna die. Something that we all know and can think about it at least in abstract terms, but rarely does the reality of our finality really hits us to the point where what do we do also with that responsibility of being alive for this glimpse in the whole of the universe? And I've been thinking about it in terms of fulfillment as well. And beyond fulfillment, what sort of problems do I want to have in the world? Because if you ask anybody about what life they want to live, most people would say the same things. I want to be happy, I want to be fulfilled, I want to have amazing friendships, amazing, love around me. But what are you willing to give or to do to have that? What problems are you willing to have? What suffering are you willing to go through to get to that level? I'm not saying that you have to suffer to be happy, but I'm saying that happiness doesn't just present itself. There has to be work involved. Because if it would just present itself, then everybody would be happy. And we wouldn't be having this conversation about a global mental health crisis. So that's the question that I've been trying to answer. What are the problems that I want to have? I know what a happy life to me looks like, but am I willing to do the work for that happy life? And so once again, I have more questions than I think answers, but that's one that feels like both an answer and a question at the same time that inspires me, and I hope it inspires others as well.
It certainly inspires me. I hear you, and I'm contemplating the same things myself. And in that way, hopefully we're both enriching our own lives, and as microcosms of the macrocosm, as you so eloquently said earlier, that impacts the whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jovanny Varela, so very much for your wisdom, your time, and your effort. It's been a beautiful interview.
Thank you.
Very enlightening. And I wish you the best in India.
Thank you.
For your next chapter.
Yeah, maybe we'll have an interview part 2 eventually.
I'll come to you.
We'll see what has changed and what has remained.